I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover news and information that the mainstream media doesn't really want you to know about, where we try to recover lost history and explain the inexplicable. Today we're going to recover lost history. World War I, perhaps our most forgotten war, but certainly the event in human history that we're still feeling the repercussions of 110 years later. World War I was a seminal event for the United States. It changed the whole nature of what we were as a country, and it resulted in sort of a cascade of historical events that we wrestle with today. There's consequences and turmoil. It's sort of both a political and a psychological and really a civilizational hangover for us as a country. Well, there's an important lesson to be learned from World War I and an important memorial understanding of World War I that we need to get a hold of and really understand and celebrate. And to help us do that, we have Sabin Howard. And Sabin is the sculptor, the creator of the National World War I Memorial, which will be dedicated next Friday, the 13th of September. Welcome to On Watch, Sabin.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Chris.
We've talked before about the whole process. We gave people sort of an overview of what the memorial was about.
Yeah.
And I asked folks that are either watching this or listening to this to go back in our archives and maybe refresh your recollection of what the memorial is all about. But it's our great pleasure to have you here in studio to talk to you one-on-one. You know, Zoom and Skype interviews are great, but
this is way better.
In person is much better.
I'm excited about this.
And my colleagues have a ton of both still photography and video that they'll drop into our discussion here today just to contextualize everything.
Good.
So World War I is a forgotten war in many instances or many cases. Everyone knows World War II, however many books and miniseries and everything else has been done, some great work. But World War I is sort of it's an enigma for folks. Yeah. But like I said in the opening, I think there are consequences or sort of civilizational hangover effects.
Totally.
How did that factor into your work, this enormous 60-foot-long sculpture?
Look, so I've been sculpting for 42 years. Classical figurative sculptor, living outside the mainstream art narrative, completely ostracized, not paid attention to. And then I win this project. And so I came into the project like everyone else, not really knowing that much about World War I in our country. We don't pay attention to it. It's the Great Depression and then World War II.
Right.
But the weirdest thing is when you make art, sometimes what you make comes out of your unconscious and the zeitgeist, and it actually educates the artist. And I have such a deeper understanding of why World War I is important for us today and how it has affected us globally and societally. And it's incredibly ironic. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. How I made a classical figurative sculpture with 38 figures. It's a visual narrative, and it's like the way art used to be prior to World War I. And I see this as like it's a new period of art that changes what happened from almost 1918 till now. It's like this is going to be about the American cultural renaissance.
One of the things I like to, I've thought a lot about your artwork. I've looked at it. I've reviewed all of your imagery with regard to how the entire progression from your concept to winning the competition to do the work, and then all of your efforts to now. Like you said, it's a classical sculpture.
Yeah.
It's very traditional. It's superhuman.
Yes.
It's full of energy and motion, and how this is the magic of what you do. How do you take a still figure and still give it energy and motion?
Oh, this thing's juiced. It's so juiced. It's so visceral when you look at it. I saw it last night for the first time without the scaffolding on the pedestal.
Right.
And I was really slightly aghast by, like, you did this? Oh my God. You know, we're living in a very fractured society. I think the globe is fractured, and this sculpture speaks about unity and the umbrella of history that is our culture. And it's a very, very unifying piece, because think about it, 100 years ago, those guys weren't Democrats, Republicans, they were Americans that went off to war.
Right.
And the sculpture is, I didn't do this virtue signaling. I have a lot of different types in the sculpture, but I did it because I wanted to make great art. I didn't do it for political reasons.
Well, you weren't checking
No, I was not checking the boxes. To me, that's a load of hooey.
Right.
I'm really not into that. I'm about making sacred, great art. In fact, my motto is, let's make art great again. That is what I want to do. I want to make something that will bring people back into the fold of being interested in art. And so the last 100 years, it's been this redundant, like, fractured, alienated thing going on where nobody gets it because it's not visual. You got to read a book to get it. But this sculpture, you look at it, and any 8th grader, anybody, no matter what their socioeconomic standing is, they're going to be like interested and sucked into the visuals here because it's dynamic. It's a movie in bronze.
And yeah, a movie in bronze. And there's a progression as you 60 foot long, enormous size and scope.
Yeah.
And walking through or walking with the sculpture, there's a progression of a story.
Yeah.
It starts and ends with family, which I think is very interesting, very powerful message, despite all the other events in between. And I mean, that's the great equalizer, right?
Alpha and Omega.
Right.
What do you got besides the kids, the next generation? That's like your main job as a human being, is to procreate and make the planet proceed population-wise.
And the other thing I think is wonderful about it is that you have great, what would they call it, in verisimilitude, right? What you show is historically, physically, technically accurate.
Yeah.
Uniforms, right? Yeah. So like the buttons on the uniforms are not just something you made up. It's legit. It's authentic.
Very.
Authentic
That's a really
to the time.
This is so neat. I went out and got the uniforms that you knew. They're 100 years old, and I found photographs with Salvation Army nurse uniform. We found photographs through 3x4s of her probably family members riding horses, obviously black and whites, and that's just how human this project is. Nothing's done in the final part of it except looking at a life model dressed in uniform and sculpting traditionally the way they did 2,000 years ago. And that's what I'm playing forward. See, a lot of the modern art world will say, oh, well, that has been done. And that hooey, it's not. It's arrogant and ignorant to say that, because every time you look, it's like you've never seen that before as an artist. And you're using your education to like sculpt this in a way that is very, very intellectual. It's very abstract. It has all the qualities of abstract modern art, yet it has the psychology of human beings.
Because there's a lot of people, myself being one of them, no offense to the modern art world, but like a crushed tin can and, you know, a purple chicken, it doesn't do it for me.
Why? Why? Can you explain?
So, I mean, you see stuff in modern art that's supposed to have some meaning, and I'm sure it does to somebody. So, pardon my ignorance, but it doesn't.
But you don't have to pardon it, because everybody's hard drive, it's like, gets whether it's art or not instantly.
Right. So, but there's a lot of stuff that's offered up as being, you know, genius that to me is just kind of like a mess. Yours is the absolute polar opposite.
I'm the opposite side of that.
It's superhuman. It's filled with energy. It tells a story. It begins and ends with family. There is tremendous sort of, you know, on the way in, I'm a geek, so I listened to a lot of history podcasts, and I was listening to one about Henry V. And it was the Band of Brothers speech, right, that the guy was talking about, and the context for the Battle of Agincourt and how important it is. The Kenneth Branagh movie is, I think, probably the gold standard in our time. But, you know, he's this warrior king who goes across the English Channel and lands in France and fights this incredible battle. Your sculpture reaches back to then. It reaches into the present.
Yeah.
It's extremely powerful, and I think it is an enormous, I mean, it's very gratifying for you as an artist to do this thing, but it's a huge gift to the American public. you've really given something to the American public.
Thank you for saying that.
I hope they appreciate it. I hope they understand what went into this and what you're trying to express to people, because there's a lot of guys buried, in France, that you bring them home by this sculpture.
Yeah, that's 22 million people decimated from this in Europe. We only lose 115,516. It's a punch on the nose for us, but for Europe, it is the destruction of a civilization. It is the destruction of the idea of a divine order, and you move into this whole new concept that we have played forward to this very moment, the sense of not being connected in community, alienated, nihilism, Sartre and Camus, the French philosophers that come out of it.
The Frankfurt School comes
all
out of
these things that just make everyone not feel part of something larger than themselves, and that is the definition of sacred. So I made something that specifically makes all those figures on the tableau interconnected, except one which is a shell-shocked soldier, and that's the guy who represents this alienation of humanity. The biggest thing that I got from this project is not the completion of it, because ultimately it's not about me. It's more about the connection that I have with people when they see it. That is so powerful for me that I had purpose and I finally did something good. That's what it feels like.
That's tremendous. And you said that as you went into this project that you had to get smart on World War I. I mean, you had a general sense of it, obviously.
Yeah.
You're an intelligent, educated person, but not everybody's up on all the little details of what happened when, and who did what to who. They have a general sense of this tragedy. What were some of the big sort of like aha moments in your coming to understand the significance of World War I? That's a tough question.
No, but I have an answer. It's right. Pops right to the front of my head. I have a friend. His name's James Mansfield, and he is a building construction person in Manhattan and does very well. And he asked me to be a model. And I didn't understand why, and he was a great model. He would bring so much emotion and energy to our sessions where we were getting iterations through photography of all these different poses. Did 12,000 poses to come up with this. So James said one day after our session in South Bronx studio, he says, hey, because I kept bugging him, why are you doing this, James? Why do you want to be a model? It's like, you don't need to do this. He says, everybody leaves, and he goes, all right, I want to tell you. So it's kind of a serious story. So my great-great-grandfather and my great-uncle went off to war, World War I. And my great-grandfather never returned. My great-uncle did return, and he then came home and with his service revolver proceeded to shoot his wife, shoot his daughter, and then shoot himself. And I grew up in that home. And so that moment was the catalyst. It wasn't from a history book. It was a generational thing that played forward, what is that, like, almost 100 years to the date, how that would change the next generation and the next generation. It's a ripple effect. You throw that rock and it's this ripple of energy that is so destructive that has continued to this very moment. And his is one story.
Right.
There are millions of stories like his that have permeated our universe and created this moment that we are at this second. And so I made a memorial that is about human beings. It is not about governments or elites. It's about the everyman. And that is what is necessary today, because it continues with these wars that never end, that we continue to throw money into them with ridiculous, made-up ideologies fed to us by the PR machine of the government.
You're correct.
And that is disgusting to me. I grew up in the Vietnam War. This is Groundhog Day all over again, and we're just like walking right into World War III. And where's the freaking protests? Where are the people like rising up in anger against the way that their tax dollars and our lives have been distorted into some ridiculous thing that is not existent? it's not about democracy. It's about money and moving the chips around the globe. And even as an artist, I've become visceral about this because I made a war memorial for my country. So I got a lot of skin in the game now.
Right.
And I'm not gonna just sit here and say, here you go, people. Yes, this is for you people, but we need to get a little bit of sense on how government is supposed to be a civil servant to the people. I am a civil servant to the people. I did this for others. It's like I'm in service of my country, and that's not what is happening right now. And I'm sorry to I have emotions about it.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I mean, you have documented. It's frozen, but it's very active and full of energy.
Yeah.
But you've documented this progression. And then, so at the end of it, one would think, okay, so what good came of this?
Yeah.
What did we learn from it?
Yeah.
And there is so little appreciation. I mean, I believe, like you, that we're sort of in a 1914 moment.
Yeah, we are.
Right? There are so many instances and so many situations.
It's just lining up.
There's a great book by a British historian named Christopher Cook called The Sleepwalkers. And it describes literally how Europe kind of was sleepwalking into World War I. And all the various machinations. There's another great book called Willie, Nicky, and George, and because they're cousins, right? So the King of England, the Kaiser, and the Tsar were all cousins. They all came out of Queen Elizabeth,
Wow.
Queen Victoria's line. They're all her kids, all married, and they were sending telegrams to each other in July and August of 1914 saying, what are you doing? Stop mobilizing. He's like, well, my generals tell me I have to mobilize because your guys are mobilizing. And so these three cousins are communicating, pleading with each other not to go to war. But the war machine, right, their military-industrial complex, well, we have to, because if they do it, then we have to do it. And if we launch our army, then we have to have, very famously, von Moltke had the Schlieffen plan, which said, let's send troops by rail towards France. Well, once you get all the trains moving in one direction, you can't stop them.
Yeah.
And so this sort of mentality is what I think we face now, where you have, Biden famously said, we can't send tanks to Ukraine. That'll start World War III. What did we do? We sent tanks to Ukraine.
Isn't that the way D.C. works, though? You kind of do a little bit and see what reacts,
right,
and then you do a little bit more,
right.
And then you keep.
And so I mention all this because that's the takeaway. That's the lesson.
Yeah.
Those are the consequences historically, this sort of hangover effect of what you've captured in your sculpture. And let's hope that we learn from it and that we're not, lather, rinse, repeat, doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
In the center portion of the sculpture, there is great violence.
Yeah.
Talk about how do you capture that, and then you kind of contain it. You contain violence, which is a tough one.
I did something that pushed me to my limit on the sculpture. I realized in the beginning, pretty much when I was doing the models, the maquettes back in 2018 and 2016, the drawings between those years, what I had bitten off, and coming into it, I was more of just an artist, and now I'm an artist with a mission because there's tremendous messaging behind what I did. And so the battle scene is the central aspect of the memorial, and it's a 60-foot long wall, but the battle scene is contained within probably 15 feet, and it is a group of men that are all, they're not standing straight up and down like the Eisenhower Memorial. These guys are like hell-bent. It's like an animalistic kinetic explosion of aggression forward, driven by the dad who is screaming at his men, come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever? With, as the famous words of Dan Daly, the Marine in Bella Woods, leading his men over out of the trench or into no man's land, into the attack, and it's all of a sudden it ends right there, and there's a gap, and you have the cost of war. And the cost of war is what I gave everything that I possibly could to. It's the destruction to humanity, because I had been sculpting human beings for all these years, 80,000 hours of looking at human beings, models. And so this is a continuation of that with huge purpose. And those figures in the cost of war are nurses holding up gassed men that have lost their sight and are mad. And the very central figure is that alienated dad. And I went at that moment to veterans, and I started learning from veterans what they had been through and the suicides, the PTSD that they suffer. And those faces, those very faces of those experiences are on that wall from that moment forward. They're Marines, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers. And I talk to them intimately as you sculpt them. You spend hours with them, and I learned from them. And I saw in their distortions in their faces and the way that their skulls came out from and pushed out against the skin, the actual morphology that shows the damage of war. And it needs to be done, and I don't think you have a sculpture in D.C. of a dead person, and there is one on that wall in a Pietà figure, reminiscent of Michelangelo's dying Christ, held up by a chaplain. And there's so much reference to Western civilization and making something that has huge lineage to the past, but it's not archaeological, but plays it forward. And I wanted to make something, construct something, do something positive with something that's so negative because it's destructive. And it's like, I want to build monuments that show us our potential and rising to the occasion, not destroying us the way war does. It's like horrible. And I don't know why there's not more outcry against the war right now. How many wars are running right now? It's like, why are we doing these other demonstrations? I don't understand.
It's very selective, right? It's very peculiar. So roughly 55,000 soldiers die in Vietnam. That's a ballpark.
Yeah.
No one knows the real number.
And then how much after that?
Right. And then the low number is 107,000, but it's probably more like 200,000 die of fentanyl every single year.
Yeah.
That's a 737 full of people 18 to 45 crashing every day.
Right.
And how many times would a daily crash of an aircraft go on before the FAA?
Selective PR.
Right. So the death toll is astounding, and somehow we shrug it off. There's no march on Washington. There's no... that's an aside, but the lesson that you're talking about concerning war is the lesson learned. Your sculpture is a powerful reminder.
It's a positive with a very negative subject matter.
Right.
Because it's not glorification of war, it's glorification of human beings.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Right? Individual human dignity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That gets lost, and it shouldn't be lost. And I think you've gone a long way to show individual human dignity, the value of life, the value of one person's life and work and effort and what comes of that, and the need to pass it on to another generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, very powerful stuff. So a week from today, you've got the big opening. Can you give us some details on
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
This is at Pershing Park, right in front of the Willard Hotel.
So this is like a block and a half from the White House.
Yeah, 150 yards from the White House.
Okay.
This is an incredible place to put a classical Renaissance rise to the occasion monument in a moment that is so sorely needed, and it is a place to rally. You come to this event and you will see something very positive in our country. This is what needs to be done. You need to do positive, constructive things that are physical. There's tons of ideas swirling around, and all these like talking heads like us, that you need to build things that show where we can go. And it puts people in a different frame of mind when they see the physicality of it.
A positive outcome.
Yeah.
A product, not just whining and
moaning.
Unifying
it. It brings us together under one umbrella, the history of our country. That's why people come to D.C. to see them all. They want to see the history of our country. So this is going to be a historic event. Evening time is the sunset moment We're going to do first illumination with lighting on the sculpture. It's very dramatic. And the park is small. There'll be 400 people probably in the park, but then right across the street at Freedom Plaza, we have a Jumbotron set up.
Cool.
And that holds 3,000 people. And I know a lot of veterans have received, the invitation to come. I really want you guys to come because the sculpture is for you. It's called A Soldier's Journey. And so this is the only sculpture ever in the history of mankind that tells that story from leaving home, entering battle, being traumatized and returning home. It is their story. It is in reverence of the veterans. And I'm really, that's something that I am very proud of. That's the biggest thing. I'm in service of them. And whoever said that before and did something this physical and this epic. And so then I will speak, and there will be a light show that unveils and tells the history and the story. And there'll be some very interesting speakers there.
Can you tease one or two of them?
Well, I brought in some of my close friends, Eric Prince and Kelsey Grammer and General Flynn, and there'll be a few more. And Bianca De La Garza is going to be emceeing a thing I'm doing after that. But I'm trying to get the wheels in motion here, and the whole thing is about moving forward. And you got to think about, okay, well, what do we got in this world? Let's leave it a better place than when we came in. And so the whole thing is start this American cultural renaissance and move it towards another monument. That's what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to do another monument that speaks equally well of our country.
Oh, all right.
And,
well, you're teasing me on this. Tell me about this.
American history needs to be, again, it's the whole idea of like bring the country together under the umbrella of our cultural history and unify us.
And whatever our defects, really, on the grand scheme of things, we have nothing to be ashamed of.
No, look, Chris, there's no place on the whole globe that I could have done this. Where can you go? Look, October 22nd, 1982, I couldn't draw. And I had a moment, I was like, I got hit by lightning, and I went and got this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and I started learning how to draw. And I had the idea, let's make art like Leonardo, like Raphael, like Michelangelo. And 42 years later, mission begins to become accomplished. It's like, it's really, I am an example of the American dream.
Yep.
And
it's a 42-year overnight success story.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but isn't that the way it always goes?
But I mean, of course, that's I'm being facetious, but it's blood, sweat, and tears, and all of a sudden you turn around and you say, hey, wait a minute. I actually did something. I actually accomplished something after all this time, right?
I will bring people together with the next project, and maybe it'll be in a place like Dallas, Texas. I want to continue to do things that are very large and epic, and also very inclusive of the whole country. That's the whole thing. I hate divisiveness. It's like, it's such a waste. Yeah. It's negative.
And there's people out there that, I mean, that's the coin of the realm for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they play with. But the overpowering message of what you've accomplished with this sculpture is so much grander than that. I made reference to the fact that literally the figures are superhuman. They're larger than you and I sitting here. But what they're conveying is superhuman, right? That's really
all
the message.
The emotions that we have as human beings, nobility, the fear, courage, anger, sense of community, everything. And that's the beauty of it, because it shows a human being for all these parts that can be human, superhuman.
Right.
Forget about it, AI. You don't stand a chance when it comes to classical art. You're a great tool, but you're not a great finisher. You need human beings to do that, and you need to get back into the education system and revamp the education system for the artists. They decimated it, and that's one of the things we need to do is rebuild the art system.
Absolutely. So that we don't end up with crushed tin cans and purple chickens.
The thing is, you got to pull the politics out of that, because the politics are what make the crushed tin cans and the purple chickens. What government knows about what should be an art? They don't. It's a propaganda tool, and it needs to be delineated that that's not your place. Yeah. Step away, please.
Please.
Yeah.
So folks that are interested, Friday, September 13th.
Yeah.
Really late afternoon, early evening. They should start meandering.
I would get over there.
You start meandering towards Pershing.
And the weekend is also, it's open to public. I'll be there. I'm going out in that plaza.
Right.
So it's a plaza, and it's very European because it's a gathering point amongst all these very classical buildings that surround it.
Yeah.
Very, very different than what we've had in this country in the past.
Which is another plus, right?
Yeah.
Great location.
Yes.
They didn't put this out someplace, whatever. It's right where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And 150 yards from the White House, which is even better. That's great.
Thanks, Chris.
What have I missed? What are we not talking about that we need to cover or touch on? What do you need to talk to our audience about?
The whole concept of my biggest takeaway is really the connection that is necessary between human beings. And I really learned from the veterans the concept of being in service of. It's like I came into the project as an artist, but I didn't have a purpose that was larger than myself and playing forward the Renaissance. So now the messaging becomes like, what does it mean to be human? Why are humans sacred? Why should they be valued? And it's, again, another ironic thing. It's like this sculpture is about the devaluation of human beings is what happens in war. They're expendable assets. And here I made a memorial that is like, no, there's not a single figure on there that is not expendable. They're all of, just incredible value. And because art is about rising to the occasion and having purpose and higher consciousness.
Right.
And that's what this sculpture drives forward. And, if you guys want to come vandalize this, you don't like me, boy, you're going to be in for a cruel, response. It's not going to be cool. This is something that needs to be valued, and I'm sure we're going to have a moment, and then I'm going to fight for legislation to stop any sort of vandalism of monuments, because if I go out and destroy a car, break a couple windows, I'm going to have dinner at that county jail. Right. Why do you get to go spray paint on a monument in front of the White House, and then you just have a couple hours down at the station, and then you're free? That's not all right. No. We're going to change that, and I will get into legislation in Congress and make those necessary moments. I'll go speak in front of the people that can make this happen. You need to take care of your country. You need to value what is yours.
Yeah, it's not just respect for the individual human life and dignity of human beings and their value, but it's also having respect and understanding for a much broader scope of history.
Right.
And we are permitted, and it is objectively good to honor persons, places, things, circumstances that contributed to society and to our civilization, and not knock everything down.
Yeah, privileged protesting will be over. Yeah. That's the end of that. It's got to end.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Sabin, thank you so much. Thank you on a bunch of levels. Thank you, number one, for being a great artist and for bringing this story to the American people. Congratulations for an incredible work. And I know next week you're going to have a terrific time. It is going to be an absolute blast. The sculpture that you've created will be valued and appreciated, and you're going to get tremendous positive feedback from people in their own way who have put their own blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
And I'm talking not just guys in the military. I'm talking family members, medical and health professionals who have helped people get back their lives. There's a lot of different angles to this. Yeah. It's not just a war memorial. It's a memorial about a war that affected the American people and still does today.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me on and letting me speak to your public.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that.
I'm Chris Farrell, On Watch.